Since I was talking about chainsaw sizes, might as well talk about some different bar mounts as well. So, got a bit of a variety here. We'll break them down into different brands. Essentially, they're your most common Stihl mounts. They're two of the three common Husky mounts, and at the back we've got some other mounts. Aren't as common for me. So, I'll move some of these out of the way, we'll get started, and yeah, we'll go from there. Okay, we're just going to briefly touch on these because I'm not as familiar with these as the Husky and Stihl mounts. So at the back, it's Oregon bar mount D176, and that's a D196. That's obviously, as it says on it, McCulloch mount. The D176 is used through the Echo and Shindawa saws. So that one is still reasonably common. It's just not something that I deal with a lot. What's slightly different with these is there is no oil port as such. The oil goes through these slots here and goes through the rail. So it's a little bit different on these. They can be interchanged with other bars, which we'll touch on in a minute. These are two of the Husky mounts. I don't have the smaller one. So below this there is a mount, both Husky and Oregon labels it an AO41. That's the smaller mount used on the little saws below, I think a 440. The one at the back here is a KO95 mount, which is the same as the AO95 mount. These are, when I started with all of this, and this is where my terminology is going to be a little off, that was small mount Husky, and the one below it is large mount Husky. At that time, we only really dealt with the two different mounts. And I'm most familiar with these due to the Dolmar saws. The small Dolmars use the small Husky mount, and the larger ones use the large Husky mount. So the difference between the AO or KO95s and the smaller AO41, they both have the same 8.2mm studs. It's to do with the oiling. These have a small oil port in them, like you'd expect. Whereas the AOs don't, they oil up through these holes. These small mount Husky bars can oil through the same way. They do have a groove cut in them. So if we put, what you can do with these is actually run these on a D176 mount or run a 176 bar on that small Husky mount. There is a difference in the studs, but it's 0.2 and it's usually pretty easy to clear up. So that's the small Husky mount. Below it we have the large Husky mount. This is a D009. This is a GB bar. They've got their own naming system. They call it a HV mount. So here the groove changes. They've got 9mm studs in them, so they've got a 9mm groove. The spacing of the oil port's obviously further out. There's no interchangeability between these two. So these fit most of your larger Huskies. If you're looking in the modern stuff, it's a 5.62 on up. They don't go to a big amount on the 3120, which is kind of cool. So that'll fit anything from that size up. So yeah, they're the two main mounts that I use in Husky, mostly because I'm a Dolmar guy, so I'll use small and large mount Huskies. But yeah, I'll just lay them on top of each other. They're obviously two different styles of bars, so there's differences, but you can see, hopefully it shows up, the difference in the width down in the tail section. So yeah, that's the basics of the Husky mount. There is three. Nice and easy. Now we go across into the Stihl mounts. Again, they keep it pretty basic. There's three main mounts these days. The only thing that slightly annoys me is the numbering system goes in a descending order, opposite to how I would think it would work. But anyway, the small mount is a 3005s, the mid mount is a 3003, and the large mount is a 002. Always felt it would go better if it went the other way, but I believe this is the older mount style anyway. If you're looking for these in an Oregon, that's an AO74 mount. a DO25. I use a lot of GB bars if you happen to be involved in that. The mid mount in a GB describes a mid mount as an SN, and that's an SLD for the large mount. But yeah, so they're the three numbering systems. So how's it work in a still? Anything from a 251 and down runs the 3005 mount. They've got a 8.2 mil. They run 8 or 8.2 mil studs. So you get a small tail section. They're pretty tiny little things. You then run up, so a 261 on up to a 661 runs a mid mount. So that's even across a lot of your sort of more farm and ranch style saws, however they describe them in their range. They all run these. It's probably the most common bar mount out there, really. The interesting thing with the mid mount stills is you can adapt them to run on a Husqvarna large mount. There is a difference in stud sizing, so you need to run an adapter. The only issue you can run into is that there's a large mount Husky below it. Generally the groove is shorter on the still ones. So this bar, on this bar here, I've had to file the groove further forward just so I could get it far enough back so it would fit on a couple of the saws. It would run on the Dolmar 7900 with the standard tail, but it needed to be adjusted for the 288. Then we move into our large mount. So currently available saws that run this mount, the 3002s, is only the 881. There is some differences in these, the new ones versus the older ones, so we'll have to touch on that. A lot of your older large mount saws, 08S, 056, things like that, yeah, 070s, 090s, all of those saws ran this style of mount, but it was different. They share the same 14mm groove and oil hole spacings to a degree, but what is different? On the older style mounts, the oil hole is drilled the entire way through. So it goes straight through the bar on both sides. The newer style does not do that. You hit the other side. The reasoning for that is a lot of the older saws oiled from the outside upper. So you'd need an oil port here in order for this bar to work. So that's why they're drilled all the way through. If you are using one of those older saws and you can't get that mount, a bar in an older style mount, you can just drill that hole straight through. So yeah, they're the common bar sizes, just sort of touching it. Each brand usually has 3. The Echo stuff, I think, is only 2, which simplifies things a bit. Outside of that, there is a wild world of bar mounts. There is probably 40 or 50 different styles of mount for different saws. A lot of the older stuff ran different things. Gets a bit chaotic. But these days, since we're really only dealing with a couple of brands, it's been a bit more simplified. But yeah, just sort of touch on that.